kick off with the shock arrest of this parliamentary researcher who he's now been named. I think legally we can say that he is called Chris Cash. He's a 28-year-old and he's understood to have very close contact with Alicia Kearns. I believe he may have worked for her, as well, indeed, of Minister for Security Tom Tugendhat. I mean, we've had this before in Parliament. We've had accusations of people spying for hostile states, be it Russia, be it China. But today, a lot of backbenchers are saying, well, perhaps we really need to rethink our relationship with Beijing, and Rishi Sunak himself bringing this up with the Chinese Premier Xi Jinping. What's your take on this whole situation? I mean, is this just to be expected, essentially, in the 21st century, or do you think there are some serious security breaches in the Palace of Westminster?
I think it's one of those stories that's simultaneously quite shocking, but also not very. The idea that China would be seeking to place informants in democracies across the world, not just in the UK. I think there'll be lots of other countries probably experiencing some of the things. Probably shouldn't come as a massive surprise. But still, I think a number of MPs and others working within the Houses of Parliament will think, how was this not picked up? How was this not allowed to? How was this allowed to happen? This is someone who's gone through quite a rigorous vetting process in order to get a parliamentary pass. So I imagine when Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker of the House of Commons, makes a statement at 2:30, he will have something to say, reflecting on perhaps how rigorous that security vetting process is.
Yeah, we will cross live to the Commons for that statement by Sir Lindsay Hoyle when it comes about. It does seem to me that, you know, there's been a lot of discussion for a long time, and actually Tom Tugendhat, the Security Minister, has been particularly wolfish when it comes to China. And Chris Cash, the named parliamentary aide who has been accused of espionage, has turned around and said, look, it wasn't me, I'm innocent, I may have studied in China, but actually I'm here to help those politicians and those ministers who do regard Beijing as a hostile state and try to educate people on quite what risk Beijing might pose. But we're in a very difficult position, aren't we? This government has made some moves to try and cut China out of certain infrastructure projects, be it Huawei from building our 5G network, and then, of course, Chinese involvement in nuclear power. But it seems to me every single day in the press now we're learning more and more and more about how many things that China has access to in this country. There was a bit of a fear-mongering headline that Chinese-made electric vehicles could essentially spy on drivers and collect data that way, whether machines like Alexas or listening devices in the homes can also pick up data and information, and that could get into the hands of a hostile state. Do you think we're in a situation where it's going to be extremely hard to extricate a country like China from our infrastructure, from our economy, or should we actually be looking very seriously at quite how entangled we are with Beijing and seek to do something quite urgent about it?
I think when you're in a world that's as globalised as ours and dealing with a country as powerful as China, economically speaking, it's incredibly difficult to extricate ourselves from that situation. I think it's right that the government is prioritising industries and sectors where there are national security concerns and distancing itself from China on things like communication technology and energy supply, for example. It would be almost impossible to do that on every front. You've got companies like TikTok, for example, they don't, you wouldn't instinctively think there are any security concerns there, but when you look at the data that is gathered by an app that so many millions, billions even of people have across the world, then there are questions to be asked. I think when it comes to diplomacy with China, some people have said, we shouldn't be dealing with China. James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary, shouldn't have visited China last year. I think that's a little bit naive. I think it would be almost impossible not to deal with China. I think we just need to go into it with our eyes open and, accept that they will be doing things like seeking to influence parliamentary staff, placing people in the offices of MPs who have access to secure information, and just make sure that we never lose sight of the fact that China are not in every regard our friends.
I mean, it seems to me that China doesn't particularly pose us a direct military threat. Of course, America particularly concerned about what Chinese ambitions towards Taiwan might be. But China poses a big economic threat. And this is this new sort of 21st century grey zone warfare where you've got the anti-Western axis essentially trying to economically develop. Who can blame them? They might not have the same sort of research and development that we have, or intelligence in certain areas of industry that we may have. And they're trying to get on the front foot by getting access to that stuff and also trying to anticipate perhaps what sort of trading relationship we may have with them in the future. But does that not sort of therefore raise the issue that if we just regard them as a hostile state within the framework of things like espionage and a military threat to Taiwan, we're missing the point? Their threat is things like undercutting steel prices in the UK by dumping a lot of Chinese steel on us, encouraging car companies to move battery production over to China, that actually the sort of conflict we're in with China is an economic war.
Indeed, it's a very modern problem, I suppose. We can't look at this through the lens of the way perhaps we looked at the Soviet Union during the Cold War. There are similarities, of course, but we are dealing, as you say, in a very economic battlefield, but also on things like R&D and tech. China actually, seeking to undercut not just the UK, many other Western nations as well when it comes to innovation, and they're doing so in many fronts quite successfully, and that is why we end up relying on Chinese infrastructure, Chinese investment, or Chinese innovation for so many different, sectors and technologies that we use every day.